As I'm sure the vast majority of my audience is aware, the provision Title 42 is set to expire tonight at midnight, and many outlets have reported that somewhere between 5 and 700,000, giant air quotes here, migrants are set to flood across the southern American border. Now, this being a very hot button emotional topic, nobody has taken a breath for a minute and asked themselves the very difficult question: why didn't they just keep the medical emergency in place? If it allowed Title 42 to remain in force, wouldn't that have been worth it? To prevent an invasion of 700,000 people. There was a whole laundry list of other reasons that a lot of conservatives wanted the medical emergency to go away, but they definitely wanted to keep this in place. But the two go hand in hand. Now, many are asking themselves, what should we do? Well, for the last few years, this channel has been trying to give some advice, and with the heavy level of censorship that came down back in 2017, I had to create a channel over Patreon to talk about it. Because when massive invasions like this occur and you start having to live and exist in occupied lands, you have to change the way you think. You have to change the way you operate. The French were forced to. The channel is called the Florida Maquis, no R, Maquis, Florida Maquis, for a reason. It was the name of a group of freedom fighters, French primarily, French and Spanish, freedom fighters that had to figure out how to resist the German occupation. And survival and resistance requires you to let go of a lot of preconceived notions. A lot of people have pushed back, Florida Maquis. That sounds incredibly immoral. That sounds completely wrong. And how could we ever? Well, anything that allows you to see another sunrise, above ground and breathing, the ability to resist for a better day. For many years, it was a very dark time in France. Now, these are 3 books that I would recommend if you want to get read up and read in on. Rise of the Maquis, Charles Fournel, The Night Belongs to the Maquis, Carolyn K. Brancato, and SAS with the Maquis, In Action with the French Resistance, June to September 1944, by Ian Walstead. There are others as well that talk about this, and it paints a very different picture than the romantic notion that was put forth by Star Trek so many years later. They had a version of this group that they had created and made them out to be just these wonderful, liberty-loving people when they did what they had to do to survive. And most of it was wildly immoral. Most of it. They took the gloves off, basically. It's the term that I use with my channel. They took the gloves off, and they fought a dirty, nasty, ugly campaign against the Germans to oust them from France. Now, if you would like to join us over at the Florida Maquis Patreon channel, where we can talk about this, taking our own gloves off, we'd love to have you. $1 per month, even less if you sign up for an entire year. It's the lowest allowable level. I regularly get emails from Patreon saying you should really abandon this. You should move it to 3. It's what we recommend most do. It will behoove you. You'll keep most of your... I want this channel available to everybody that can possibly afford 3 pennies a day to get this information, because it's critical to understand what is going to be necessary to survive. Even if you're from a more biblical standpoint, think of what the Hebrews, Israel, had to do to survive while they were being held captive in Egypt. All those generations. I'm sure a lot of it, if it had been documented, would have been probably seen as wildly immoral as well. But in the main news last night, this had to mess with a lot of people's minds. I don't normally ask this question, but I think in this particular case, it's appropriate. How did it make you feel knowing that to tune in and hear Donald Trump make his case, you had to help promote CNN's ratings? After the thousands and thousands of statements from the president about CNN being fake news, how it's a terrible news channel, how you can never get a fair shake, all this for his supporters to follow him, he had to financially help out CNN by his mere presence. I'm sure if there had been a town hall on One American News or Newsmax or The First or many other channels, even Fox at this point, for God's sakes, I'm sure they would have tripped over themselves to have him sit down for an hour, hour and 10, hour and 15 minutes and talk with somebody. Now, there's some things that I have looked at and listened to that I don't see anybody talking about, that I think he gave away so much information. Nobody saw this. Now, what is the first piece of information? I truly now believe that Donald Trump has already chosen his running mate. I know in other videos we had speculated about Marjorie Taylor Greene, Kari Lake. DeSantis clearly is off the table now because of all of the insults and all of that, all the acrimony. The reason I believe he has chosen Sarah Palin is one of the first questions he was asked when they got past the whole 2020 election thing. He talked about the energy issue and the price of energy. The woman asked him, Ms. Collins asked him, what would you do? And he said 3 words: drill, baby, drill. Now, of course, that was Sarah Palin's, standard election line way back in 2008. And there was an event where he had Kid Rock and Ted Nugent and Sarah Palin and somebody else where they were all standing around the desk here. And that was way back when. But also, all the way back in February, I thought this was curious at the time, and I wish I had investigated it further. Sarah Palin came out and said Ron DeSantis should sit out the race. And I'm like, why does she care? This was way back in the middle of February. I'm like, why does she have a dog? How does she have a dog in this fight? Why? First of all, she's not in politics anymore. And number two, why would she feel the need to cozy up? Well, I think we know why she was cozying up to Trump. And speaking of vice presidents, how many of you heard the big boo line where Donald Trump came out and said, and I quote, Mike Pence is a nice man who just made a mistake. Mike Pence, of course, has already announced his exploratory committee to run for president in 2024. Donald Trump himself calls the guy a nice man. He calls him a nice man, but he insults DeSantis literally every chance he gets. Now, if you had your choice, I want to ask you guys this, Trump supporters, devil's advocate here, holding your nose, if you had to choose between the next president being either Mike Pence or Ron DeSantis, who would you choose? Apparently, you differ in opinion with Donald Trump himself. Did Donald Trump call Ron DeSantis nice man? No, he's called him every name in the book. He has insulted the job that he's done here. He even got a shot at him late last night as they were leaving. He got a De Sanctimonious in. But he called Mike Pence a nice man. A nice man who made a mistake. How do you jive that? Down in the comments, I would really love to hear this. How do you jive that he is much more of a fan of Mike Pence than he is of Ron DeSantis? Because I've heard this whole equating Ron DeSantis with George Bush and Ron DeSantis with all these other people. If you had a choice between Jeb Bush and Mike Pence. Who would you pick? If those were your only two choices, Jeb Bush, Mike Pence. Apparently, in that case, you also differ with Donald Trump. Now, the final point. And I know this is really going to tick a lot of you off. Now, when I first heard the whole thing about the E. Jean Carroll civil suit, I thought it was all made up too. I thought, oh, this is so many years later, they're just pulling this out. I thought it was made up until I heard Donald Trump talk about it. And basic criminal psych, military psych 101, listening to the man speak about it, absolutely he did it. Absolutely. A Florida Maquis, how can you say that? The first thing every accused rapist who is guilty does is try to make the allegation that, oh, that woman, that's not my type, I'm not attracted to her, not realizing that rape has nothing to do with attraction. It's about power. It's about control. It's about being the one in charge. It has nothing to do with being attracted to the person at all. Why do we know this? Because what happens in prisons around this country, thousands and thousands of times a day, where it's just all men. Men who, when they went in, were perfectly straight. What do we know? It's about power and control. And the reason I brought up this picture is Trump told two very easy lies to debunk. Number one, he kept saying, I don't know this woman. I never met this woman. I don't know. He said that. Okay, fine. He says that. But then he went into this long diatribe and tirade about how he remembered specifically this E. Jean Carroll was in an interracial relationship with this radio guy who he's talking to right here. Now, this is something a lot of people wouldn't remember in the modern world. Back in the 90s, when this was alleged to have happened, in this group of people in the mid-90s, these hyper-wealthy, mostly Caucasian Manhattanites in the Democrat Party, there was no such thing as an interracial relationship. It was unheard of in that crowd. Now, in the 90s, sure, there were interracial relationships all over the country, but not in this group of people. You see, they were a special protected class. They were beyond that. That it just didn't occur. And him meeting a woman that he even said when he was shown this picture, he mistook this moment for this being Marla Maples, his wife, one of his wives. And somebody had to point out to him that this was not Marla Maples, that it was E. Jean Carroll. He would have remembered this encounter like it was yesterday. And he sat there without notes and described the encounter. But then out of the other side of his mouth said that I don't know who this woman is, never met her, I don't know anything about her, all this kind of stuff. She was a beauty queen. She was a beauty queen from Indiana. Definitely his type. And here's the side-by-side. This is not the same woman. On the left, this is E. Jean Carroll. On the right, this is Marla Maples, one of his wives. I mean, I thought that Ivana, his first wife, looked a lot like the porn star. This is the, what's her name? Stormy Daniels. This is even closer. This is way closer. So here's this woman he met, looks almost exactly like his wife. When he met her, when shown the picture from way back then, back in the 90s, he thought he was looking, he even said it. He's on tape saying it. That he thought this was Marla. Somebody had to point out that it wasn't. So you put all that together, yeah, he did it. Absolutely did it. Why? Because he lied about it. Because he's lying. He's trying to convince everyone of something that is just patently untrue. So it's just the case. I don't know how you take anything else away from it. So There was a lot more that people talked about with him calling her nasty this or whatever in the election, this, that, or the other. All that's going to be noise. All that's just going to be noise and nobody's going to care about it. But looking at critically what we're facing going into 2024, Alyssa Farah was talking with Byron Donalds on CNN after all this went down, and she made a great point. She's like, if it's about the ideas of moving away from Biden's ideas, okay, if it's just about that, we can get that without Donald Trump. We can get that. In fact, she even said, we can get that with Ron DeSantis. We can get all of the ideas, all of the really good ideas about changing the direction of the country without all this baggage. And this is the key. This is the real key here. This is the thinking man's moment. And I'll leave with this. How many of you have ever heard the term, absence makes the heart grow fonder, familiarity breeds contempt? This is what CNN was going for. Trump had been out of the spotlight and out of the news for so long, they had forgotten, they believed that their audience had forgotten their outrage on the left. And this is exactly the angle that Biden played. Remember him sitting in his basement for those months and months and months and months, not saying a word, just being this generic replacement, the alternative to, while Trump was out running his mouth over and over and over again, just making people angry just because he could. Mean tweets and all this kind of stuff. You see, what they did was they took advantage of this old adage. They said, we need to bring Trump back and give him a platform so that we can reignite the outrage in our base and fire them up to move these polls away from Trump and toward Biden. That's what this was all about. That's what this staged event was all about. Her job was to get this guy, was to poke this bear and to get him going on and on and on and on about all these things, because their people had forgotten about it. They were looking at what Biden didn't do this, Biden didn't do that, Biden's this, Biden, all this negative. See, the familiarity breeds contempt part. All of their base is focused on all of the negative of the last 3 years. So this is why they did this. And it's the real big story here is that they thought, all of social media thought, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, all these platforms thought, we need to silence Trump. We need to take away Trump. We need to take away these ideas, and that'll further our cause. And it actually backfired. I was stunned a few months back when YouTube came out with a new policy that relented a great deal on the whole quote-unquote election lies thing. I'm like, wait a minute. You could, the one warning I have on my channel was a video that I did with Donald Trump in Alabama talking about this. And I'm like, why in the world would they relent on this? Well, this is why. Clearly, CNN got in with all of the social media masters in California and said, look, this isn't working. The quieter you keep this guy, the more people are focused on Joe Biden's flaws. That's the problem we're having. So we need to bring Donald Trump back, give him all of these platforms back, and start to accentuate his flaws. And that's what this was. That's what this really was. They don't care what he has to say. They're just going to be there to remind people of why they were outraged. You mark my words, they're going to start talking about the whole Handmaid's Tale nonsense, and that's why they focus so much on the issue with abortion, because they're trying to start to bring back in the female vote, even from the conservative side. So anyway, 20 minutes. I will leave it there. But once again, to deal with the impending invasion of the massive hordes. Ask the French about how a wall works. By the way, the Maginot Line got completely overrun. They had, look up Maginot, Maginot, line, Line, the Maginot Line, and how it was completely and utterly useless in stopping the next phase of war. The Germans blew right through the Maginot Line. That's what we're facing right now. Wall wouldn't have worked. Wall wouldn't have worked. They're going to come right through the open parts of the border. And nothing's going to be done. So if you want to survive, if you want to learn the tools and the tactics and have the necessary attitude to survive, join us over at the Florida Maquis Patreon channel, where we talk about the realities of what's going to happen when 700,000 come crashing into this country, bringing their culture with them. And that's all I can really say. Those of you who've been over at the Patreon channel know what I'm talking about. Thank you. All of you for your support. I very much appreciate it. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you guys next time.